name is Katherine Walters. I'm a wire knitter, wire artist, and jewelry maker living with chronic illness here on beautiful Bell Island in Newfoundland. And welcome back to my channel. Here on my channel, you'll find jewelry making and wire knitting tips, tricks, and tutorials to help you make beautiful and decorative items for yourself and for your home. Now, in the last video, you'll remember I showed you a new stitch making technique where you learn to make the flurry pendant. Today I'm going to show you another way to use the same knitting technique to make something a little different. Today you're going to learn how to make a garter stitch square, and that, you can see my earring? That's a garter stitch square. That's a very versatile jewelry component that can be used and combined in different ways to make a variety of different kinds of jewelry. I'm also wearing a garter stitch pendant. By varying things like the size of the wire and the size of the mandrel you use to create the stitches, you can get a real wide variety of sizes happening here, which opens up a great deal of design potential. I want to remind everybody, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Those two things go a long way to helping out my channel, which will be great. And anyway, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, we're back. This time around, we're going to use an 8mm needle, slightly larger than we have used with copper, mainly because bronze is stiffer, so you'll want the extra room. But we're going to make the stitches the same way we did the last time, and I'm going to show you here for the benefit of those who missed the last episode. You press your thumb against your mandrel, and you start winding. You go under and come up around towards yourself. And the reason you do this is because you always want your wire to be coming out in front of the stitch that it just created. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Now, I've done a few extra stitches, at least I hope I've done a few extra stitches. And I'm just going to give them a little twist together and turn. There we go. I've got a nice little coil made. The trick with using different size wires is varying the size of the mandrel that you use. For copper, you can use smaller mandrels, like the 7 that we used was just fine. Because bronze is a tougher metal, you're going to want to have a slightly larger mandrel to do the same thing, just to give yourself a little more wiggle room. I'm using bronze today, mainly because I wanted to show you that it is possible to make these designs in different wire, even wire that's stiffer than copper, and bronze certainly is that. It has a different sort of color to it. It's still inexpensive as a base metal, but it has a lot of design possibilities attached to it, so I use it for that reason. Anyway, we're going to tease our stitches out like we did the last time, and if you are brave and you try bronze wire, you're going to see that this part takes a tad more Armstronging than the last time. And I'm going to pull that end out because I'm going to want to have a little more of a tail to work with than I did the last time, just because, again, the wire is stiffer. And you create your stitches before you start using them, and the goal is to try and make your stitches fairly even. So you pull them apart, as you see me doing here, working them, so you try to get them fairly uniform in shape, because as you know from if you've knit with yarn, that consistency in your knitting tension is a good thing. Alrighty, so I've got my stitches teased out here now. When you're doing garter stitch, your first row of stitches is however many stitches you want your piece to be. We're going to do a 9-stitch 3-row garter stitch square, which is a small one, but I could do 5. I could do any number. Now, I will tell you, I have a preference for odd numbers of stitches. For some reason, the odd numbers visually look more attractive. And ideally, you know, if you're going for a square shape, then you'll do as many rows as you need to create a pleasing shape. I find the 9-stitch garter stitch square to be a nice size. And it's the kind of jewelry component that you can make lots of and then recombine in different ways. So if I'm going to make this three stitches in width, the first thing I need to do is I need to give this a little bend between the third and the fourth stitch, because I'm going to push this around in a second and push it in through the back of that stitch. Making your first turn with garter stitch is always the toughest because you don't have much to hang on to. But we're going to do a little pushing and pulling with our chain nose pliers like we did in the last piece. So don't worry if it's not perfect as you're doing it. So the first thing I do is I push that up through and pull it up and fandangle it a little so it's basically pointing in the right direction. You can see there. I'll move it up closer to the camera. You can see we've got the first stitch done. I'm going to make a little bend, so this stitch and that stitch are now perpendicular to each other, and I'm going to push that in the next stitch. And then I'm going to pull it up and flatten it with my fingers. If you can't make that first turn, it means your mandrel probably isn't big enough for the size and stiffness of wire that you're using. So if you're using wire you have on hand and you find that you're having difficulties actually making that first turn, if you go with a slightly larger mandrel, that might do the trick. So only wind off about 10 or 11 stitches to begin with and do a test run to make sure you've got the right mandrel wire size and wire type combination. I'm going to push that in, and now I'm going to do the last stitch in the row. So I make my 90-degree bend and I push it in and I push it up. Now I'm going to do a little bit of fandangling with my fingers. I've got that basically straight, and as you can see, first row of knitting is done. Now we're going to make that same bend and twist on the end, and pulling that up with our chain nose pliers, giving it a little pinch, flattening down with our fingers. Make sure our stitches are ready to go. Make the bend and push in again. I'm doing this in fairly large wire. I have used 22 gauge silver and copper for earrings. This is going to make a fairly large square. And the finer the gauge wire, the 22 gauge is a lot easier to manipulate than 20 gauge, whether it's copper or bronze. But this will show up better on camera. So we persevere. Make the 90-degree bend again and push that in. Now, as you can see, I've got a square forming there. I'm going to get my flush cutters and I'm going to cut at the top of the next stitch. So I've got a nice little tail front and back. Because, oh, it sounds like my significant other's computer next door just made a hoot and holler. I don't know if you noticed in the intro, but my workshop is in my hallway of my house. So I literally am in the heart of my home. Alrighty then. Now, we've approximated a square shape there. I guarantee you when we stop this off, we're probably going to warp things a little bit, but that's okay, because we'll use our bench block and our trusty chain nose pliers in a few minutes to deal with that. But first thing we've got to do is we've got to tuck these ends away. So you've watched me with the chain nose pliers. I'm going into the stitch below the last one I did, and I'm making a couple of turns with the wire. Oops, I have way more wire there than I need, so let me pull that up a bit, making sure I've got the flat side of my cutters pointing down, so that gives me a flat cut. That's what I get now for not having my magnifiers on. Can't really see what I'm doing. All right, that's pretty good. You saw me rub my fingers over it. If there's nothing overtly sharp and pointy when I first do that, even before sanding, then I know I'm good to go. Now I think this time I'll cut a little bit of this off ahead of time. And all I'm going to do here now is the same thing. This time I'm going to do the wrap going in that direction around this part of the stitch right here. And all you do is you keep making small adjustments so you can get a nice tight wrap. You only need to go around twice. So I'll go back in. Oops. Now that's not normally what I do. That's on the floor now because I didn't get my finger on it. I don't have my magnifiers on. And unfortunately, that's what happens when I don't wear my magnifiers. My bad. Anyway, welcome back to our garter stitch square. It's not quite square now, and this is where we do a little Armstronging and a little bit of, I like to use a steel knitting needle for this because it'll let me do a little bit of pulling. Sometimes you need to go in and, for example, in the bottom row there, you'll notice the center stitch is a bit bigger. If I go in with my pliers, I can nip that together and even that out. Did you see how that made my square grow? So sometimes you need to do that. You need to go in and you need to play with it that way in order to get the right shape. I'm just going to go and play around with this. I encourage you to do the same. And when you think you got something you can live with, and that's looking pretty good there now, you need to decide which side is going to be the front and which is going to be the back. And I'm going to suggest that you hold it in your hands and look at which side has the final loops most visible. Now you can see here on this side, the previous stitches are sort of cutting them off. If you flip it over to this side, now they're behind. And that becomes important right now because we're going to use our chasing hammer to flatten and texturize this a little bit. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lightly tap and flatten the last 3 stitches. I'm going to come in, give that a slight adjustment. Now I'm going to come in with the small end of my chasing hammer and texturize the ends a little bit. What that does is it gives it a nice reflective quality. It also work hardens your curves, so this isn't likely to come apart now. What I'll do with the rest of it now is I'll give it a few twacks with a plastic mallet or a rawhide mallet, and it's for the same reason. You want to try and set things into place so this doesn't move around too much, because at the end of the day, it is knitted wire, and the knitting will have more flexibility to it than a solid piece of metal. But that's okay, because you know how to work harden. You'll notice I keep pulling it because I want to try and maximize the squareness of it. And this is where you have to have really good accuracy and aim, because you can, it really hurts to pinch your finger on one of these. And I've done it a few times, so be warned. Now I'm just trying to nip that little curve in a little bit. Sometimes where your wire dips and weaves, you end up with a little bit of a protrusion, and you can just tuck that back in with your chain nose pliers. And now I'm going back to my wraps, because sometimes in the process of flattening you loosen them, and that one's pretty good. Now there you have it. You have made a garter stitch square. This is big enough to be a pendant, or if you happen to like bigger earrings, you can make a second square like it. And what I tend to do when I make earrings, I'll just pull mine out here. These are smaller, done in a 22 gauge. But what I do when I hang the earrings is on ear wires, You'll notice I hang them facing in different directions. Okay? It's just nice to have that symmetry. Then people can choose to wear them with the loops pointing out or the loops pointing in. If you're going to do that, you'll want to do a little bit of texturing on both sides of those loops so you get the symmetry. But this is for a pendant, so what I would do next is insert a large jump ring through here and run a piece of leather or a chain through it. That's all there is to it. So you can make these in different sizes. I encourage you to experiment with different wires and with different size mandrels. Do take a good hard look at your piece at the end, and if there's any tool marks, sand those out. Make sure you clean your wire before you make your stitches. It makes it a lot easier to do a final polish. But there you have it. You have made a garter stitch square out of wire. Okay, after I completed the first garter stitch square, I played back the video, and I realized that you probably could benefit from a couple of close-up shots. So here goes the close-up shots. I wanted to give you a real good close-up on how I make the turn. So this is about as close as I can get to the camera, so bear with me. Let's see if the light is better on this side. All right, I think the light is as good as I'm going to get it. So we make that little, I don't make quite a 90-degree turn, and if you'll notice, I bend it, but I also push the stitch in the direction that I want it to go, because I have to make a twisting motion. Did you see that? That was the twisting motion that I've been wanting to show you. And I hook it out, and I pull it around, because I want that to line up much like that. Now I'm likely to go more 90-degree, so it will fit in through. And I suppose it actually helps to make sure that I've opened the bottom stitch enough to fit that through, because those stitches seem a tad big, but we persevere. And up we go. And lastly, make sure this guy is going to handle that last stitch. And I mentioned before, the process of creating the wire fabric actually distorts things a little bit, but don't let that worry you, because you have the ability to fix that. All I have left to do here is to stop the wires off, and just to give you a close-up on where I will plan to do that. On the bottom, I will wrap in this direction, wrapping around here. So I'll come up over, I'll go down through here, I'll come up, and I'll go down through here a second time. On this side, I'm going to stop off here on the middle stitch, just because that's where the wire comes up through. Okay, so I'll stop off here. And you can see here that on the first stitch, goodness, I don't think that wire actually helps. That light actually helps. You can stop off right here, or you can stop off right there. So anyway, that's your close-up shot. You go from this to this. I have a preference when I'm hanging these pieces to go through this loop right here. For some reason, I've tried hanging them from this side and the wrap tends to get in the way. So this tends to be the best place to put a jump ring through. So if you're making a set of earrings, you'll want to texture the loops on this side, and then for the other earring, because it will hang in this direction, you'll want to texture that side. Okay? Anyway, I hope that close-up helps make things a little bit clear. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to my channel, as it really helps my channel grow. And it'll ensure you don't miss the next video. And I'm hoping that will be actually a video on how to use Viking style wire knitting to set a cabochon. Hope you'll join me. Thanks. Have a great day.